Good morning, everyone, and welcome to National Tea. I want to thank you for joining me and very soon our panelists for a discussion about food insecurity in Canada. I'm Angela Knight from CBC Radio in Calgary. And before I introduce you to our panelists from across the country, I would like to acknowledge in the spirit of reconciliation that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, and the Tsuut'ina, Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Now, because we are virtual this morning, I would also like to recognize all of the Indigenous peoples of Canada, and we strive for respectful relationships with all of the peoples in this country as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. We want to thank you all for being here. I know as you were joining in this morning from wherever you were seeing some of the stats that were flashing on the screen. And I know you've seen them all, but I think there are some that are worth mentioning aloud before we begin our discussion this morning. Previous to the pandemic, 8.8% of Canadian households, so that's about 1.2 million, experienced moderate or severe food insecurity due to financial constraints. In 2020, 14.6 indicated that they lived in a household where there was food insecurity in the past 30 days. Those numbers are staggering to see that jump. Almost 1 in 7 Canadians currently food banks. They access a food bank. Of those, 34.1% are children and 6.8% are seniors. And that is the group that is outpacing all other age groups. Those numbers may shock some of you. For our guests this morning, certainly not a shock. We're going to talk about those numbers and a lot of other issues this morning as well. And we welcome your comments and your feedback. So by all means, as we're chatting this morning, this is a super casual conversation. We welcome your input. You can fire those questions into us via the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can as we go along. I want to warn you, we've got talkers on our panel this morning, so we'll try and let you get a word in edgewise. Joining us, we have the CEOs of 4 of the largest food banks in Canada. In Ottawa this morning, we want to welcome Rachael Wilson. Good morning, Rachael.
Good afternoon from Ottawa.
Oh, yes, good afternoon. I'm going to say hi, no more references to the daytime. In Toronto at the Daily Bread, Neil Hetherington. Hi, Neil. We have David Long in Vancouver, and we have James McAra, who's joining us in Calgary today from the Calgary Food Bank. We want to welcome you all. So all of you, those numbers I know are not a surprise to you. The last few months have been incredible from all of us. The pandemic has hit everyone, touched us in some way. Maybe we could go around quickly and just check in with you and find out what the last 18 months have been like for you dealing with the pandemic and the greater need that you've all seen. Rachael, ladies first, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Angela. Yes, in Ottawa, like we've seen in many cities and provinces right across the country, we've seen a tremendous a need and a changing need. We have gone to doubling the amount of food that we provide to families so that we could ensure that people could stay home. We've also moved to home deliveries, again, to ensure that those who are having mobility issues, who are immunocompromised, and even single parents, so that they didn't have to take their children out with them when they needed to access food. One of the other things that we have seen is that there has been such a tremendous focus on food insecurity right now, which is, we were here before the pandemic. Unfortunately, all of us will be here after the pandemic. But I think there's been a real understanding from many people that any reason could bring someone to a food bank, that there really isn't blame involved in food insecurity. There shouldn't be any shame in accessing a food bank. It can take a loss of a job, a medical emergency, a pandemic. We had tornadoes a couple of years ago. There are so many reasons why someone might need a food bank. And we're starting to see some real shifts in attitude as well.
I think that's a really good point, Rachael. Everybody has been touched in some way. David, certainly, did you experience people coming to you for the first time? And what is that like for someone to come and experience that?
Thanks, Angela. Yes, absolutely we did. We saw people who came to the food bank who they were very honest in saying, I never in my wildest dreams expected that I would need to come to a food bank. And there was one young gentleman, I think he was in his mid-20s, who lost his job, came to the food bank, and he actually sent an email the afternoon of the same morning he came for the first time, just to say what an amazing experience it was. There was, because we try and make it as welcoming as possible. The volunteers and the staff are smiling. I've got music playing, because there is no shame. And that's a really, really important point to follow up on Rachel's comment. There should be no shame in coming and getting help, getting assistance. Everybody goes through tough times. We at the Greater Vancouver Food Bank, we've seen retired nurses coming to the food bank. I've seen retired teachers coming to the food bank. So, and it's, thanks to the donors that are watching this, it's because of them that we're able to do the work that we do.
All right. Neil, let's check in with you in Toronto. What have you been seeing for the last 18 months?
Well, we knew that this was, we were in a crisis prior to the pandemic. And so that simply exacerbated the challenges that we had. So we were seeing just over 60,000 client visits per month. That number hit an all-time record of 125,000 this past June. August, we expect, unfortunately, I don't have the numbers right now, but we expect August exceeded that. So, the pandemic showed us that we had a significant challenge. We can make this as much of a welcoming environment for people to get food in a way that there is no shame in it. But I think we do need to talk about shame from a public policy perspective, answering the question, why is it that there are so many people that need to come? And can we, in some way, make sure that we harness the goodwill that has been here, the increase in awareness that Canadians now have about poverty and food insecurity? Can we make sure that we harness that at a time where on September 20th, we're all going to the polls, that we can effectively change policy so that each of the four of us are out of a job?
Wouldn't that be something, Neil, if that were possible? We're going to come back to some of those questions for sure, because you touched on some really interesting things. But I did want to check in with James in Calgary. Can you kind of give us the overview of how things have been at the Calgary Food Bank?
I would echo what my compatriots have said. Rachel started it with that. It has been very changing, but it's a lot of people coming to us suddenly. I would also say, to David's point, that there is no stigma, nor should there be, but I know we're still all afraid. We're afraid when we see that our pantries are depleting. We're afraid when we see that we have an issue, that we don't really know what to do with it because we've never experienced it before, and we threw a pandemic on top. In Calgary, I think we saw people as a community come together and say the right thing to do right now is to look after each other. Now, no matter whether it's we saw massive increases in people turning to the Calgary Food Bank. And that's not just individuals, it's also families and agencies who were grappling with the same issues, and putting everybody together and giving a sense of we can do this, it's going to be hard. That is what we saw in Calgary, is we saw that roll up your sleeves, we're going to do this. It may not be pretty sometimes, and at other times we're going to get a bit of a break. But the challenge of dealing with the numbers in the hundreds of thousands, that's not going to change right now. So we need to focus not only on looking after the person who's at our door today, but we also need to look, as Neil said, into the future and say, is this actually what we want in our communities, where we're backstopped by literally a not-for-profit or a charitable organization that does food sharing, when the root causes that are driving people to need food are what we really need to be tackling. And these are very short-term, mid-term, and long-term view on how we're going to do. But certainly Calgary was no different than any other community in Canada as the pandemic hit us. How are my kids? How's the food supply? How do I get through this in as safe a manner as I can, given that we're all in the unknown?
So now we're not out of it yet. As we know, we're in the fourth wave. Who knows what's going to come next? And as we've seen, people who never dreamed they would be in this position found themselves close to the edge. Or, we've always talked about that one paycheck away, but those words became reality for a lot of people. Now that we're coming out of it, even though it continues, what does the future look like? How do you keep this going, or how do you stop it from continuing? Because there are those out there who say, you know, food banks, if there weren't, food banks perpetuate the need for food banks. How would you address that, Neil? Oh, I think we've lost Neil. There we go.
I tried to put mute. Sorry, I'm the goofball of the four. So
it's a close tie.
In phases. That's how we would address it. So right now, there are individuals who cannot get by this week without the food that we supply. That's a reality. That's a fact. And so we need to make sure that they are supplied with that food for their families. The second is, you know, pathways out of poverty. Making sure that there is access to employment, making sure that there are wraparound supports for those individuals to make sure that they are accessing the social benefits that are appropriate for them and their family. And the third would be advocating for the systemic change that we want to see. So making sure that there is a system in place that ensures that everybody can thrive in the communities that they live.
How do we create those systems is the question. Rachel, what would you like to see happen going forward?
Here in Ottawa, we like to think ourselves a little bit like a hospital. So we, like Neil, will always have an emergency department for those who need food immediately. But our hope is that the rest of the hospital is looking at prevention, long-term treatment. So really working as an entire system together. One of the approaches we're doing here in Ottawa is to connect food banks with community health and resource centers, connect with other programs that have complete wraparound supports. Food is a natural driver. Food will bring people to our doors. Once they're there, how can we support them to really understand and address the issues that brought them there? So whether that is employment services, housing, childcare, language services, we recognize that putting out more food really hasn't solved the issue. The Ottawa Food Bank's been around for 36, 37 years. I think James has been around longer than that. Well, sorry, the Calgary Food Bank. You've definitely been around longer than that. But we know that putting out more food really it doesn't solve the issue. And we're tired of it. We are tired of doing the same thing over and over again. So we're taking this novel approach of trying to get wraparound services right in a food bank. So when somebody walks in, you're almost triaged. What brings you here today? How can we help you? And we're hoping that will help us address some of the systemic issues that we're seeing.
And we know that those things can be barriers for people, right? So by having those services right there, it eliminates that one more stressful or frustrating thing for someone so they can access those services. David, in Vancouver, what are your thoughts?
I think there needs to be a frank conversation about food in Canada overall, the amount of food waste. Canada produces enough food for 52 million people a year. There's only 38 million people in the country, and yet 4 million people or more go to bed hungry every night. So the food system's broken. And, you know, I absolutely agree with Neil and with Rachel. Sometimes I agree with James. But we're all trying to do the same thing, but there needs to be a frank conversation about food waste, about the volume of food in this country and why people are hungry. There shouldn't be a single hungry kid in school anywhere. And you know, we just need to start having meaningful conversations with the right people about those things.
James, in Calgary, what are you thinking?
Well, in my day, when I was walking uphill both ways through the snow, wow, you know, there's that.
We should let the audience know that you all are very well acquainted with and get along extremely well. And you talk so often, right? Because you're always talking about these issues. Yep. and sharing information as you learn, correct?
And so for my esteemed colleagues, I think I would somewhat phrase that. The piece around food not being part of the conversation, you know, we have each touched on, and we have all experienced, and that's a commonality for all of us. We have some kind of disaster or some kind of expectation, and all of a sudden it's the food bank that has to bail everybody out. I'm being like really broad in my sense of bailing everybody out here, but we don't have a conversation around food unless it comes into some kind of economic conversation. Oh, we need better trade, or we need more of this or that. We don't talk about the family and the fact that we're all going to sit down to a meal tonight, and what is that meal going to be? So when disasters happen, or when you just have a crisis in your family, for food to be expected, it's kind of like you're expecting somebody all the time to look out for you, but you never invite them to the planning conversation. You never invite them or even engage them to say what's actually happening within the community. So there was a comment that we've made before, which is food banks are in an interesting position, is that we can see a system of action between partner agencies and how those agencies move and how clients move within those agencies. And it goes into that state of we're not engaging food banks in that conversation. And yet the expertise is amazing in terms of being able to address issues that we could say, yeah, if you made these tweaks to social assistance programs where they weren't like sand dunes that, you know, the faster you tried to climb up, the more it was taken away from you. You know, we would be able to have policy and community decisions that would impact people immediately and show long-term change that is what we all talk to. And I think donors to food banks understand that. They understand that their contribution to food banks is what's keeping this support system alive, and that there's sort of a faith that at some point somebody will engage the food banks and say, okay, how do we change this? How do we get it so we can close the food bank so that James doesn't have to put up with these other young whippersnappers making snippy comments at him all the time?
Well, we'd hate to see that end, James, because it keeps you in line, quite frankly. But we do have a question from the audience, someone who'd prefer to remain anonymous. But their question is, what is your position on the proposal for a guaranteed annual income that's being discussed in the federal election? James, why don't we start with you, and we'll give everybody a chance to answer.
This is a great question. I will actually jump the question and say that a guaranteed annual income, from the information that we've seen and the discussions and the research behind it, it makes sense that we would do this. But what is the root challenge that we're getting at? What we're getting at here is there is an income discrepancy between what families are receiving and what they were going to go. So is the conversation about just putting in another program that over time will become antiquated, such as we've seen with EI or social assistance in provinces, this would just be the next big thing? Or do we take this and say, look, we're looking at employment and asking employers to look at the benefits of not a shareholder economy, but a stakeholder economy? So being in favor of some form of base income, I think has to take it one step further and say it's not just about a guaranteed annual income, because there will always be challenges on where is that money going to come from. That's always going to be the case. But I think we use this as a platform to say, what do we expect within our communities? And will we allow labor laws not to be enforced? Will we allow certain other pieces that were already in place contributing to the root causes to continue to be antiquated?
All right, Rachel, your thoughts on this question?
Well, I mean, here in Ottawa, when CERB came in, we saw our numbers really level off. So clearly there is a correlation between the basic income and food insecurity. For us, it's really important that a guaranteed basic income recognizes and is at the rates of cost of living in each community. The cost of living in Ottawa is significantly high. I can only imagine what it is in Toronto and Vancouver. So it has to keep pace with that. But it's not a one size fits all. It can't be the only thing. It has to be a part of a web of solutions. That if we think that we're going to bring in basic income in order to eliminate other programs, that's not reality. There are many people who cannot return to work. There are many people who want to work. So it needs to be a program that really meets the needs of individuals where they're at.
All right. David, your thoughts?
I completely agree with James and Rachel. This is such a complex situation. And there just are, we saw exactly the same thing at the Greater Vancouver Food Bank. When CERB came in, we actually saw a bit of a dip at the very start because we had a number of seniors who were self-isolating and didn't want to come out. But it's such a complex situation, but we need to start having those conversations about what would this look like? And to James's point, where does the money come from? And it hasn't been solved because it is a difficult problem.
All right, and Neil, your thoughts?
I'm fairly bullish on a guaranteed income, and I agree that if you think about a social safety net, that is one strand in the net, and that we do need to think about other aspects and other programs that would complement it, and make sure that it's not static. It might work and be designed appropriately with decent evidence behind it, but ensuring that it is consistently looked at and that we make evidence-based decisions. I was terribly disappointed in Ontario where we made the decision to stop the pilot projects that would have really provided significant evidence on the merits of the program. But having looked at where it has been implemented worldwide, you can say that there is directional positive elements there, and I want to make sure that we look at that, make an evidence-based decision, and be guided by the values that we espouse, that nobody ought to be living in poverty, and this might be a way out, provided it is one of a host of interconnected programs.
All right, great point. Now we do have another question from Susan Fisher, and some of you touched on this already in some way, but she's asking what might be some of the ways any of your leadership is influencing public policy with respect to food insecurity tied to poverty. COVID has certainly highlighted these direct links, and she's got a part B. How would you focus, how has your focus on advocacy changed, if at all, in the last few years? And you've kind of all touched on this in some way, but Neil, let's go back to you and start with you.
I'm just going to adjust a speaker thing. So I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind taking a different order, Angela.
Who would you like me to call upon next, Neil?
Well, the very fine Rachel, I think, would be wonderful.
Rachel, tag, you're it.
It's because I'm the one who pointed out to Neil that we can hear whatever that voice is. It's probably really important information being shared. For us, in terms of public policy, we have always been, we're in a position, we're in Ottawa, which of course is the home of the federal government. We recognize that this is an issue that needs to be dealt at all levels. So we focus heavily on the municipal government. Here in Ottawa, we haven't had a poverty reduction strategy in over a decade. We have focused primarily on housing. It's been a very siloed approach, and we're really pushing, along with many city councillors and other advocates, to have a cohesive poverty reduction strategy here in Ottawa. And then we work with our partners at Feed Ontario, which is the provincial organization, and Food Banks Canada, which is the national organization, to really look at what are the issues at that level, how can we speak to candidates here locally and ensure that that is being pushed forward. So that's my answer to the first question, and I forget the second question.
How has your focus on advocacy changed, if at all, in the last few years?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it has. I think it's the guaranteed basic income, we do, as Neil said, we were incredibly disappointed when it was canceled several years ago, and not being able to access even the information that was gathered out of the early days of that pilot project. So for us, the pandemic has shown to some degree how a basic income works and how it supports those who are most in need. So we continue to use that as our pushing forward. We agree that it is a complex issue about how you're going to fund it, but there are many people who are working on that issue. We have regular conversations with people working in basic income. So I'm not sure it has changed too much, other than to remind people that food security has always been an issue. The pandemic has just really highlighted it for us, but it has truly been here since the 80s, and the recession in 2008 saw our numbers go up by about 28%. We're forecasting a long-term effect from the pandemic as well, that we will see our numbers continue to rise over the next 24 months, and they may never return to what they were pre-pandemic.
Okay. David, why don't we go to you? Would you like to address that? I'll just read the question again, but it was, what might be some of the ways your leadership is influencing public policy with respect to food insecurity tied to poverty?
I think what's going to come out of the pandemic, or what will come out of the pandemic, is better relationships, a better awareness. One of the comments earlier on was that food is sort of front and center now, and the federal government has given money through Food Banks Canada to help. And for me personally, what we've done with our leadership team, it's all about better relationships with city councillors, mayors, and the different municipalities that we represent, and having those conversations and actually telling our story. And I think in Vancouver, one of my biggest criticisms, I've been with the Greater Vancouver Food Bank just over 3 years, but we didn't tell our story. And people have a vision of the food bank from maybe 20 years ago. And one thing I did in Vancouver was I actually invited Vancouver city councillors to come and tour the warehouse. And when you see a 40,000 square foot warehouse, we look like a massive Costco, but we're free. And when you see 40,000 pounds of food leaving that warehouse in one day, or the fact that in the last year, we've distributed 7 million pounds of food out to people that are having a tough time, that when you actually show someone that's in the political arena or at city council level or at a mayoral level, it's got to have an impact. And I kept getting the same feedback from a lot of the people I would tour saying, oh my God, I had no idea. I knew the food bank was over here somewhere doing great work and you guys are awesome, but I really didn't see the size, the scope, the complexity of what you're doing. And we need to tell that story. Okay.
And James, do you need me to repeat the question or are you good to go?
No, I'm good to go. I'm actually going to give a little bit of history here in terms of food banks. Like when you look at the history of food banks and what's going on, food banks were empowered to help the community and to share food and to feed and to engage and provide connections in many cases to the root cause behind what caused somebody food insecurity. You know, nobody wakes up and says, oh, my fridge is empty, geez, I must be food insecure. It's a complicated piece that we're all navigating through, and it changes. My observation would actually be for everyone to look at Hansard, because there's a history in Canada where as much as we as leaders and we as participants in the food banking, as it's sometimes called, is that it's really great as a PR piece or to stand up in a house and say, you know what, I went to the food bank and this is what I saw. I challenge the government to address this. But we've also seen so many times in Canada at all levels where the individual or the party who called the government out on how they've dealt with food security, when they become in power, they completely forget that was once upon a time their statement. You know, so if we look at Hansard and other recording means of saying to people, yeah, it's really nice that you had a great photo op there, but then what did you do with that information? How did you encourage change in a position of leadership, of voted leadership, where we voted you in with the expectation of you running our community or our province or, you know, however you want to look at it within the structure of our communities. So there's also this expectation that food banks will just do it. And because there are no consequences to political leaders, and when we, as David commented, now that food is in the spotlight and they're being held to it, other things are coming up too. The lack of fresh water. Having lived in the territories myself, the lack of fresh water becomes an issue and it underlies food security. So I think there is a bit more to it in terms of influence. I would offer that a lot of food banks, and the large ones especially, are tired of trying to convey that. We put up a great fight, but we would love for somebody to be actually on our side when it comes to policy decisions and actually engage with us and say, oh, you know what, we got this great information from, as Neil said, what's the evidence-based information? And this is what we made decisions on, as opposed to, can we come by for a photo op? I think those pieces are challenges that we have to look at. What I've seen in my time here is that people want to make a change. They don't know how. And in part it's because they don't have the information or the time or the impetus, the intestinal fortitude to actually think in ways that will change policy for the good. The information's there. You just have to do it. And that seems to be the challenge, is actually doing it.
Okay. And Neil, are your speakers good now?
I think hopefully it's not too bad. You know, behind me right now, what you heard was the tail end of an all candidates debate. Each member of the political parties were behind me. I was moderating the debate till this started, and they were having a conversation about poverty alleviation and how we're going to implement the national poverty alleviation strategy. And that's important to have that conversation. As James says, it's important to hold them account to completing that strategy or not. What we have done at Daily Bread, I think, is provided research and evidence to elected officials to make informed decisions. We will let them know when they need to course correct, and we will guide them in a pathway that hopefully espouses the values that we want to live to. We've taken more progressive positions recently. You know, if you think about the past year, what we have learned about systemic racism, what we have learned about challenges in the Indigenous communities, and in many ways an awakening of the country, we need to use that awakening in a way that will fuel us to make positive change. And so we are not afraid to speak to the development of affordable housing, the systemic barriers that there are in the community, the criminalization of poverty. These are stands that food banks are now taking so we can tackle at the core the essence of poverty alleviation so that we can decrease the lineup of individuals outside this building.
Okay. What I'm hearing from all of you this morning is a great deal of frustration. We have seen the demand grow for you, and more you're being asked to do more as others drop away. We certainly saw that through the pandemic, people closing their doors, unable to help their clients and pushing them your way. We've heard you talk about the need to keep this conversation going. It is front and center right now. You have the knowledge. You actually know what's going on, but you are not able to have that conversation go further. I know you're all working with different levels of government, but what has to happen next? How do you make that change happen? How do we get it further? And how do you get them to stop just coming for a photo op and actually make some policy changes? What is that going to take, Rachael, to make that happen?
That's a very good question. I think one of the first things I'd really like to see is that food banking is seen as part of the solution. It's not the only solution, obviously, but there are many people working in food insecurity, and I would like all of us to be unifying our voices so that we can collectively pressure the government to make changes, as opposed to us sort of scattering our messaging and pointing fingers at one another. I think the pandemic has really shown how partnerships work, how we can do so much more when we are working together. So I'd really encourage all of us working in food security to come together and find a solution together instead of working against each other.
Okay, David, did you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that I agree with Rachael. Like we need to have a unified voice. We need to. I think this today is awesome. I hope we can do this again. I hope we can have these conversations. I think it's an education for a lot of people about exactly some of the issues we're facing. And you know, when the financial crash that happened in 2008, the use of food banks increased 10-15%. It never went back down. And what we're going to see now, as hopefully we get through this pandemic, we're at the Greater Vancouver Food Bank. We're planning 3-5 years out, because okay, somebody's lost their job, they had to use the food bank. Hopefully they got another job, but what people aren't realizing is the debt that family went into, the credit card debt. That's now what they're having to face, and that's now what they're having to pay down, and they still can't afford the food. And so, you know, it's lots of conversation. It's unifying this great group of people that I call my friends, and we all work. The last 18 months, I think James has aged actually better than most of us. But it's been a tough 18 months, and when we banter with each other and we talk to each other all the time, we have great relationships, we help each other. We are part of the solution. We need to stop being looked at as, oh, it's the food bank and all the rest of it. You come and see what we're doing, come and see the support that we're giving out, and really start listening to how we can make a difference.
Neil, I see you nodding your head. Is that something you agree with?
I agree with everything in terms of the friendship that is on the screen. You've asked probably the most difficult question, Angela, in terms of, okay, well, what's the solution? Ultimately, it goes to the political will to make a difference. And so we know what the solutions are. We know the social policies that have to be there. You look only to our neighbors to the south who recently implemented a child tax benefit. And the massive positive impact that has had in poverty alleviation in the United States. We have that. Have we enhanced it? And is it at the right level? Are questions that we need to ask. So we know the policies that need to be in play. I think it's now time for us to translate the goodwill that people have shown to food banks across the country, harness the number of new individuals who have put up their hands and said, I want to be part of a solution, and make sure that part of that solution is not just dropping off food here or making a donation, which is important, but also putting up their advocacy hand because when politicians listen, they want to be reelected. And so when those hands go up and we can positively affect policy, that's when ultimately I think we'll see change.
That's the donation that matters most, perhaps. The donor's advocacy on behalf of food banks. James, what are your thoughts?
I have many.
Yes, I know you do, James.
Yeah, actually, I'm doing two things. I'm listening to everybody, but I'm also reading the really great questions that are in here. And I've chimed in on a couple of the ones, knowing that we don't have everything in the world, every time in the world. But I'm reading through, and I'm going to pull a sense of what I've seen in the questions from the audience today, which is it's really incredible that if in a time of need, so many people turn to food banks, not just as a source of I need some food, but they also turn to food banks in terms of I want to give back to the community. And that's the voice, I think, and Neil touched upon that that's the voice of the future. That's getting volunteers engaged. That's making sure that your community is part of it. And there's great comments in here on when you're in this, it's not about what party do you support, but what platforms or what changes do you think any party can make and will make when they represent us in a particular house? There's lots of things. Volunteers are an amazing force within food banks. I don't think that there's a larger volunteer engagement. And the danger of that is that the volunteers are also donors. And that voice needs to be echoed a little bit more. I know when you read the questions about can we solve this, it's a really complex issue, but I think we're already in that process. So I think that's what the future holds, because we have this attention at the moment in time to say food is important. Let's stop saying that it's not, but that has to go hand in hand with the expectation that employment is important. And if you have an employer who's going to either lowball or not follow the rules or skirt the rules, and we're not enforcing those rules, I think we'll also continue to be there in a difficult position.
Okay. Now, James, you referenced, we do have some really great questions. I'm not sure we will be able to get to all of them, but we're going to try. And actually, we have one for you, Rachael, from Lynn, who writes, I'd be interested in hearing how Ottawa's food bank collaboration with other community services at the point of contact has assisted in better meeting clients' other immediate needs. What results have you had from the collaboration, and has it helped address the root cause that brought the client to the food bank in the first place?
That's a great question. Thank you, Lynn. We actually, before we even started any of our work, we partnered with the University of Ottawa and the Maple Leaf Center for Food Insecurity. And we did a 2-year longitudinal study looking at what model of food bank has the best outcomes. So it was the first of its kind in Canada. And it clearly indicated that those food banks that were connected or providing additional wraparound services, the clients had better outcomes. So we know evidence-based that is the case. So we took that information and now we're piloting in 3 locations, different ways of doing wraparound services. So we have one where it is a self-motivated coaching program directly in a community health resource center. We have one now that we're just starting, we just signed the paperwork, so it starts in October, where we'll have a caseworker who will will actually travel around 4 different food banks, and we pilot these projects, take the information and the research, and then make assessments about how successful they were. And more importantly, we then share that with the province and the rest of my partners across the country. So it's early days. We've only been engaged in this work for we've had one pilot since 2018, and we just completed that pilot, and now we're seeing if we can replicate some of the results in some of our other locations. So we will continue to communicate this with our donors. We rely heavily on donor support. We only get normally 2.5% from municipal government. We don't receive other federal or provincial funding with the exception of last year. So sharing the impact that donors have on our community is really important to us.
All right, well, let's continue to build on that theme of donations. Peter has written and said, how do we address the challenge of recognizing donation efficiency so that food banks can make their own purchasing decisions aligned to the communities they serve, with community desire to participate in more traditional food bank support channels? So things like food drives and product donation, that kind of thing. How would you like to address that question? David, how about you? We'll start with you.
Again, that's a great question. Thanks, Peter. What we've done, actually, we're just finishing up. One of our sort of objectives this year is we've kind of coined the phrase, it takes more than food. And we've actually created a video that I'm pretty excited that I'm going to share across the country to my peer group and also on social media. And it's the story of, it's a journey of an apple. And it's the apple that we have farmers up in the Okanagan who grow great apples for us. We buy them for maybe 35 cents a pound, whereas you and I would buy them at the grocery store for $1.50 or $2. And it's the journey of the apples from being picked off the tree to being given to a child outside the food bank. And it's sort of a 60-second clip, but it tells the story of picking the apple, and you need the truck to transport it. You need the forklift to take the apples off the truck. You need the refrigeration to keep the apples. And then all of those things go together. And so it's the complexity on, I guess what I'm trying to say is giving the food bank the freedom to use the donor's money wisely. And that, what we try and do is make sure that we're getting the freshest produce, and then we can buy and get the best deals. And then we're dealing with local farmers. And so we're not tied to a specific item that we might need to buy. And one of the other things we've worked on and focused on is trying to reduce the number of food drives that the public are actually doing, because and I'm guilty of this as well. It's your kids come home from school and there's a food drive for the local food bank. What do? You clean out your kitchen cupboards, and it's really not what food banks need in this day and age. It's there was a great comment made by one of my leadership team about those high sodium noodles that you add hot water to that cost 50 cents. People that are having a tough time making ends meet, that's the food that they can afford. They can't afford the milk, the cheese, the eggs, the fresh fruit and vegetables that are so expensive. And that's what we're focusing on getting out to people, because we're really focusing on healthy, nutritious food from a very early age. We have 3 programs for kids. We want to make sure that kids' development is being addressed. That we're engaging with dietitians to make sure that the food that we're giving to children is appropriate, that there's high levels of nutrition for proper brain development, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. Would anyone else like to comment on that question?
I appreciate what David had to say about that. At the same time, if you think about a parent taking their child through a grocery store and saying, listen, we need to make sure that other children, just like you, have a great nutritious meal. Why don't you select some food that you would like to make sure goes to another? There is a lesson of empathy that is taught there. And so there is an opportunity to essentially develop advocates through that. And I never want to discount the benefits of food drives. It is absolutely, without question, more economically sound to have a food bank make the bulk purchases that we do. Just to my right here that's 10,000 cans of tuna. And Angela, none of you would not be able to buy that tuna for the price we paid for. And so that makes a lot of sense to be able to get that out. But a food drive is about engagement. And so if we want to tackle the root causes and we want to elevate our positions of advocacy, then we need an army of advocators. And to do that is harnessing in many ways the very straightforward opportunity for everybody to drop off food in Toronto, at least at any fire hall all across the city. So that's one benefit. And then, sorry, the second part to that, there was a comment in the chat room about ethnocentric foods that might be more appropriate, culturally diverse food opportunities. When people choose to give, and they choose to give a food that maybe is a delicious food that they would serve their family, but not necessarily one of the 10,000 cans of tuna that I've got behind me, but rather something that is a unique offering, that is a helpful opportunity in our public food sorts to be able to, in some ways, address in a small way, address and there are many other ways that we do that, the diversity of food that we need to get out there. So I'm just a little bit more okay with the food drives than I think my colleague on the left side of the country, that there really is positive benefit there.
It is comforting for people to be able to give a can of soup, or in this case, maybe some tuna, and know it's going where they want it to go. Rachel, do you kind of share Neil's feelings, or are you more on side with David?
I'm probably, for once, closer to Neil. And I know it's surprising. During the pandemic, we typically spend about $3 million worth on food. But during the pandemic, for the first time ever, we had to purchase some of those snack items because we recognize that providing the things that you make a meal out of is not enough to sustain a family for a week or 2 weeks. So we actually purchased for the first time some of what we call category C, which are the nice to haves, the snacks. And I was surprised at how important that category really became in a pandemic to be able to fill out someone's full day of meals. But I do agree, there's always going to be a role for food drives. My daughter's school does them all the time. It is an absolute way to make that connection between donors of food. And there are some people that's what they can afford, and we greatly appreciate it. But when we do receive cash, we are able to do things like the wraparound services. We implemented a global marketplace program where actually we're giving money to our agencies to be able to buy the ethnocultural food that is appropriate to their community. There is so much diversity in Ottawa. I know it is incredibly diverse for David, Neil, and James, but being able to provide the food that is actually needed in your community, we've given those funds to the agencies to be able to do. So when you make a monetary donation, you're helping us do those kinds of programs. So the food helps address the immediate needs, but the funds really help us address those long-term food insecurity issues.
All right, James, and in Calgary, here at CBC Calgary, we do a huge food bank drive every year, and James has drilled it into our head. For every dollar you give, we can distribute $5 worth of food. So James, where do you land on this? Like, I don't know.
Well, for me, it comes back to engagement. I mean, when you're looking at your community and you want to do something, you choose how you're going to engage in your community. And there's also an element of trust. So if I don't know much about the food bank, then maybe my first stop is going to be the tuna or the, whatever I have in my cupboard, because I'm testing the waters and I'm not really too sure about this. And we're all trusting individuals that share our trust with the community. But then as we start to get into this, if I tell my neighbor about this great food drive that's happening in Calgary in September, where we're gonna hit 300,000, it's the largest food drive that anyone can ever imagine, short of CBC's at Christmas time. And it's an opportunity to say to people, not only thank you for supporting us, but this is the impact of what you're doing. And that element of trust to say, oh, okay, are you just giving this to that person who, and we've all heard the story, drives a Cadillac, won't get a job, wants to live off, the government forever. And we can tell you that that's not the people that we see. I mean, I'm certain you can find one, but when we look at the vast majority of what's going on here, I think that trust and engagement with the community, let's start with a can. But then let's maybe volunteer and see if they do what they do with our can. David's comment on where did the apple go? Neil's comment on here's a a huge amount of tuna. Rachel's comment on engaging the community where it's at. They're all different pieces of the same solution, or the same addressing the same complexity, which is showing to your community that you're walking the talk, and that there is no doubt in somebody else's mind that a gift to the Calgary Food Bank, or a gift to your food bank, you can track it. It doesn't just disappear into a bag and no one knows what the actual outcome is, or you get a glossy report every year that, basically suggests that you might have done something with it. Not that that's good or bad, but I'm looking at food banks to say the advocacy of the donor is also in the trust that is placed in the organization through whatever donation they make and however frequent they make it, because they can see that in action. There's no question that a child is going to be fed today. There is no question that a senior is not going to go without. And there is no question that as we all eat differently, that will also be available to individuals and agencies of the food bank. So I think this is a great way to look at that and say there is a difference being made. And whether you can say our purchasing is going to allow us to do X with this, there is no charitable organization in Canada that can outproduce a food bank. There just isn't, because we have so many avenues of engagement, and that's what we're known for. We kick ass and take names on behalf of our community. Sorry, I said the A word. And that's incredible. So those levels are truly incredible. And yes, we forever love CBC in Calgary for their support and also their leadership, because many people don't know that out of Calgary, a lot of other media organizations, not just CBC, have also engaged their community locally. And there's a critical piece of, be in my community and also let that flourish in other communities.
Very true. We're running out of time very quickly, but there is one last question I want to address here that's in the chat. Donor advocacy is so huge. And you are absolutely right, Angela. I just wanted to get that in there. Truly is the biggest donor advocacy. What are some ways Canadian food banks have increased informing their memberships, advocacy, and engagement toward greater causes? Let us start, Rachel.
We use a lot of our social media to do that. We have hosted town halls. Of course, unfortunately, we've had to stop those. But I think one of our biggest things is every single year we put out a hunger report, which talks about what we're seeing in our community, the numbers, who we're serving, where they're coming from, just showing the diversity of the need in our community. I think that's probably one of the greatest tools that we use, and we share it with politicians so they understand food insecurity in Ottawa. And I know many of my colleagues also put out a similar report that really talks about what is the need and provides that evidence that really shows what's happening in each community.
All right, David?
We have a lot of communication. We use social media a lot to get our information out there, the numbers and the stats. We have a data analyst on staff, and we really crunch the numbers on a regular basis. I can tell you exactly how many people went through yesterday. And it's to Rachel's point, you need to just communicate that out to your donors on a regular basis, let people know what's happening and what's going on. And we not only do a daily report, do weekly reports, monthly reports, and then an annual report. And it's going back to a point I made earlier. It's about telling our story. It's about telling people the volume, the numbers, and engaging with all of our donors, whether it's volunteering their time or making financial donations. But it's also equally important to communicate back to the industrial donors. Tell them the difference that they're making in the community. And one of the things we try and do is to close that loop back to some of the big industrial donors and say, this is what happened to the food that we were able to distribute that you gave us. And we get photographs of meals being made in different with different agencies, and just keep that communication open as much as possible.
All right, Neil, your comments?
Like David and Rachel, certainly there's a lot of reporting that's done, the use of social media to make sure that message gets to donors who are advocators as well. But I conclude most of my emails to donors with an invitation, an honest invitation to say, come down anytime you find yourself near the food bank. Love to see you. Love to give you a tour of what we do. And then I think the next piece, and I'm bringing it back to advocacy, for many years, headed by our VP of Advocacy and Research, Talia Bronstein, but taking over from experts like John Stapleton, we have taken data and linked it into social policy recommendations, and let our donors, let our volunteers know, and let our clients know about the opportunities for policy change. And the last part, I should have said it first, on clients, is we are a rights-based organization. We fundamentally believe that our direction and governance needs to be coming from those that we are serving. And so that means our advocacy policies need to be guided by those with lived and living experience. And so we will go to that group and we will ask them the questions about what we can advocate for that will make their lives better. All
right, and James, your thoughts?
I'm going to echo what my compatriots say, and really looking at how we do this. In Calgary, we ask a question: what happened as a result of the food? It's not about more is better. It's about the impact that you have when you talk to people and say, were we good? Were we good? Did we do what we said we were going to do? And did that help you so that you don't have to come back to the food bank, that you are better connected in the community? And we find that same piece pattern with our donor engagement as well, which is, what are your questions? What happened as a result of your donation has to be reported back as well. It's not about, did you give more or less, or, taller, shorter, wider, whatever. It's about the impact that your contribution has to the community being matched with the impact that a client is telling you is going on. Because as an organization, you can say whatever you want, but when you connect the end user and the individual who ultimately was changed because a donor took that monthly gift and made it possible, that's the connection. We can prove and walk the talk. And I think that's the connection that we all seek, is understanding what happened as a result of our engagement with food banks.
All right. We're running the risk here of getting, the hook because we're over time. But I did want to ask you, we've talked about donors and the power that they have to be advocates for food banks, the different ways that they can donate, whether it's through their volunteer time, donations financially, or whether they want to give food donations. But quickly, are there some other ways that you can engage donors to support food banks? Rachael?
Yes, there are many ways, and we really value every gift of time and treasure that anyone can give. But one of the things that is really important for us here in Ottawa is the annual gifts that people give. So the regular donations that someone might make at the holiday season, or when we do our renewal campaigns, the gifts of $25, $50, $100, like James, and I'm sure David and Neil, we can take every dollar and turn it into about $5 worth of delivered food. So it has a tremendous impact on the work that we do, and we literally cannot do the work we do without that regular support. It is so important to us, and more importantly, it is so important to the people that we support. We work with a network of 112 different agencies that are serving children, seniors, singles. Today is the first day of school, and I know that there are after-school programs that are starting up today, and those are truly funded by the community. The Ottawa Food Bank is by the community and for the community, so we are just so grateful whenever we receive those annual donations.
All right, James, for you in Calgary?
Once I find the mute, I commented earlier in the thing, and as well just a few minutes ago, that the impact that a monthly donation makes for this organization helps us understand what we can do. It improves our planning. It improves our ability to say, yes, this is coming up. We know what will happen, but it also tells us that we've engaged donors and that we need to go back and say, this again, this is what we've done with your donation. But that monthly donation allows us that planning ability to say, if there is a pandemic or a flood or a fire or something, or a crisis in a family, we know that we won't have to suddenly run out to buy a fire truck to start putting the fire out. We will have those pieces at least in line where we know they're going to be available.
All right. And Neil, your thoughts? What would you say to donors?
I would say the Daily Bread Food Bank, all of the food banks on this call are going to be here for those weathering the storm, not this year, but 2, 3, 4 years from now. 2008, the peak food bank use, 2008, the peak food bank usage happened for us in Toronto in around 2011, 3 years after. You think about all of the ways that Canadians came together to support one another when the pandemic first hit. And as we go back to our normal lives, you know, we might forget about the food bank and those who were the first kicked out of the economy and the last to be brought back into the economy. Our pandemic at the food bank will continue for 3, 4, 5 years beyond this. We are not in our peak right now, despite all the government interventions, but CERB is ending, eviction controls are ending, and our numbers are going to continue to increase. So I would ask that somebody consider making a multi-year pledge. I agree with James in terms of the annual or the monthly giving, how important that is, but a multi-year pledge so that we know that we have a partner when things are most difficult 2, 3 years from now would be hugely appreciated.
All right. And David, in Vancouver, what would you say to donors?
Donors are amazing. The donations that we receive in Vancouver, it is quite overwhelming and humbling. And, you know, I echo Neil's comments earlier about, you know, please, if you want to have a look at the food bank, you want to come and see how it works, please just let us know, come and ask questions, come and see what we're doing on a daily basis. And a real meaningful way to leave a legacy is through your will, if you would ever consider that. And we actually have a program in Vancouver where if you'd like to leave money to the food bank in your will, a bequest of some form, and you are a donor to the Greater Vancouver Food Bank, we can actually get your will created or adjusted for free. And if you need information details, please reach out and let us know. But that is, to me, that's just a huge way of leaving a legacy for your community for years to come.
All right. Thank you all for this discussion today. Clearly, from all of the incredibly thoughtful questions that we've received, this is a conversation that people are interested in having, and we need to keep it going. Oh no, James has raised his hand. Actually, so the debate for me, James, is whether I actually say, yes, go ahead. Yes, James, what would you like to say?
I would actually like to say thank you, Angela, for
you are welcome.
Putting up with what I think are a fabulous group of people, not speaking for myself, but speaking for the people who joined us today, for Rachael, David, and Neil for being, you know, so gracious with sharing their information, their expertise, but for everybody on the call today for coming to this and being open and asking questions afterwards as well, you know, and saying, you know, don't worry, I got a question, send us an email, we'll answer the emails, we're desperate. Yeah. No, I didn't say that. Sorry, that's just David. No, wait, sorry. No, actually, I wanted to say, Angela, thank you very much for hosting us, for walking through this and making it such an easy conversation in a very difficult topic. We cannot do this without people like you being able to harness the cats, as it were, and putting this together. So from me and from all of us, Angela, thank you very much for doing this for us and for what you do in the community every day.
You are most welcome. I was delighted to have been asked. You're all fabulous individuals and great talkers. And I think what we've seen here is that, as we said, this conversation has been going for a while, but it's in the spotlight right now. And we need to keep it going further. So I love the ideas one of you had mentioned earlier. This is something maybe that needs to be done on a more regular basis, checking in, because we are seeing that people are very invested and they want to have this conversation. So we'll encourage people, as you can see on the screen, there's a way to get in touch with all of your food banks. I want to thank you all, Neil Hetherington from Our Daily Bread in Toronto, James McAra from the Calgary Food Bank, David Long from the Greater Vancouver Area Food Bank, and Rachael Wilson from the Ottawa Food Bank. Thank you all for being here this morning and for your thoughts and the work that you do. And thank you to our audience, to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Let's just keep it going. Thank you so much, and we wish you all a great day.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you, Angela.